you went to Lincoln last year, so you'll just have to bear with me, some of you haven't. I'm sure that by now, you've all heard about the Holocaust, World War II, but how much do you really know about it? Probably not too much. I was just a little girl at the time, but I remember it very well. I didn't go to a camp, but my family perished in one. My little brother was 5, never heard from again, so. It first started out by Hitler becoming the leader of the country. And he became chancellor on January 30th, 1933. And by the following months, he started the first camps. Now, these were not death camps. These were just camps for people that didn't agree with his policies and his politics and so on. And he had people locked up for that, but like I said, it wasn't a death camp. Most people think that the Holocaust started when World War II started. Well, it started much earlier. It started in 1933, and the war didn't start till 1939. One of the things that he did right from the beginning was forbid anything Jewish to have any meaning. All Jews were immediately registered and what have you, and he knew where they were and what they were doing and all that. And there were many, many things that happened. There were 400 laws passed in the first 5 years that he was in there, and they were all against Jews. I never went to a camp myself, but I'm still a survivor. People say, why do you still talk about it? It's so many years ago. But if you don't pay attention to the history, it'll repeat itself, and we don't want it to ever happen again. One of the things that a lot of the younger kids, you're old enough not to feel that way, I hope, but some of the younger kids say, well, if you come to school on Monday morning and I tell them all the books were gone, all the books were burned, and the kids say, ooh, goody, goody, goody. No more homework, no more nothing. Don't have to go to school anymore. And then I explained to them that without somebody writing it down, nothing would ever get invented. We wouldn't have TV, we wouldn't have iPods, we wouldn't have anything like that, no planes, no cars, no nothing. And then they say, ooh, wait a minute, maybe that wasn't right. They burned books by the 100,000. Can you imagine that? He started the book burning in April of 1933. Yeah, in April of 33, 6 years before the war started. In one day in Berlin, they burned 10,000 books in one book burning. I don't think we have that many books in this school.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe in the school district. How many we have?
We have 12,000 in the library.
Oh, we do?
Yes.
Okay, so anyway, it means all of those books would be burned in one burning while you guys would be marching around waving flags and what have you. And these weren't just books by Jewish authors. Anybody that wrote anything that Hitler didn't like or any of his buddies didn't like was burned. And it didn't make any difference whether it was political, religious, what have you, it was burned. Some of the names you would even recognize: Czech London, Hemingway, Sigmund Freud, Lenin, Einstein. And of course, most of you probably know that Einstein was born in Germany, but he came over here because they were going to kill him too. Greatest genius lived in those days, and yet they were going to kill him just because he was Jewish. I had some things happening to me. I remember the first thing that happened to me was the girls' Hitler Youth. It was mandatory for every boy and girl to join the Hitler Youth, and I couldn't get in it. I was heartbroken. No uniform, no parades, no saying Heil Hitler. none of that. I wasn't allowed to do it, and it just broke my heart because I didn't understand why. Of course, when I look back now, I'm happy I wasn't, but it just was very heartbreaking because I was only about 7 years old at the time, so it was really, really rough. Another thing that made a very bad impression on me and haunted me for many years, I was living with a family of relatives. They were my great aunt and great uncle, but I will refer to them as mom and dad because I went to live with them when I was only 3, so they were more parents to me than anything. And they had a maid, a housekeeper. Her name was Miss Simon, very nice lady. And one morning, we got up for breakfast and there was no breakfast, so my foster dad said, well, she must have overslept, go on upstairs where her room is and get her. And so I ran up there and her room was open, but she wasn't in it, so I went looking for her. And I went looking in the attic, and there was one section of the attic that the kids weren't supposed to go in because it wasn't quite finished off, and that, of course, where all the kids hung out all the time, because it was too big. So I went in there, and I found her. I looked up, and she was just swinging back and forth, just swinging from the rafters. And I think in my brain, I knew what had happened. But I couldn't accept it, so I started pulling on her and beating on her and screaming, get down, it's not a time for playing games, you're supposed to be fixing us breakfast, and you're in real trouble. And I carried on something awful before I went back downstairs and told my foster mom and foster dad what had happened. And that's the only time I ever heard him curse. Mom just fainted. Well, I was just a little girl, so the next day they told me Miss Simon had gone away. They always did that to me, treated me like, well, I was a little kid, and little kids weren't supposed to understand all those things. What they didn't realize is I was never a little girl. None of us kids that were in this situation were ever like other little kids. But that was pretty rough on me when I realized what she had done, that she had hung herself, and I found out years later why, because she was Jewish and she knew they were coming after her, so rather than have them go take her, she killed herself. One of the things that I remember, and I don't know how many of you have heard of the night of the broken glass. It's in November. It was in November. It was a night where the Nazis in big groups went out and they burned down synagogues, destroyed Jewish homes and Jewish businesses, and it's called the Night of the Broken Glass. And I remember my foster dad came in, he woke me up, he wrapped me in a blanket. Now this was in 1939, so that means I was just a little kid, 38, I don't know, yeah, it was 38, year before the war. And he wrapped me in a blanket and took me uptown, and he told me that I should always remember this, and I should be proud of my heritage, and some days the Nazis were gonna get what they had coming to them and all that. And I said, yeah, and I pretended that I was really interested, but to be perfectly honest, the only thing I was worried about is, what if somebody sees me wrapped in a blanket carried around like a little baby? That was my only concern at that particular point. Of course, as I grew up, I realized that it was a lot more than that. One of the worst things for me personally was one day when I went to school, I was about 10, and we had an assembly, about 500 kids, something like that. And every one of them was in uniform, except one little boy and I. Obviously, he wasn't allowed to wear one either. And we were called up in front of the assembly, outside, and then they pointed fingers at us and told everybody that we were dirty Jews, that we were contaminating their school, that we were tainting it by being there because we had tainted blood. And then they told us to get the blankety blank out of there and never ever set foot on school property again. I loved school, so to me, this was the most horrible experience of those years, really. When I look back, maybe it wasn't that horrible, but to me at that point it was. You gotta remember, I was only 9 or 10 years old. I think it was 10. And I ran all the way home. I never saw that boy again. I have no idea who he was, so I don't know what happened to him. Ran home all the way screaming and crying, and I took all my clothes off to see why I was different. Did I have a tail? Did I have horns? What was wrong with me? Why was I a dirty little Jew? And they never said just Jew. It was always dirty. When they talked about Jews, it was always prefaced with dirty. And I couldn't understand that. None of us could, because we were clean. We scrubbed our elbows and knees just like any other kid. That's the way it was. And Mom and my foster mom and her 2 daughters, who were 30 years older than me, they were all crying, and then my foster dad came home, and first he was very angry, and then he said, well, don't worry, you're gonna be better educated than any of these little Nazi, I won't use the term that he used. And as it turned out, he was right, I was better educated, but that's neither here nor there. In fact, he went out and he hired a professor, and this was a German who could teach no longer. He was German, but he wouldn't join the party, so he was no longer allowed to teach. He was a college professor. He came over every day to teach me, and boy, he taught me. If I made a mistake on page 3, I couldn't just correct it. I had to do the whole thing over again. I hated this old man. And he was old. He was in his 40s. So, but that was one of the bad things that happened. Another thing that happened, my foster dad, great uncle, whatever, he had an apprentice. I don't know if you guys know what an apprentice is, other than from some silly TV show. In those days, if you didn't want to go to college after grade school, when you were about 14, you went as an apprentice to somebody. And Dad had an apprentice. He was about 14, I was about 10. Gosh, he was good looking. Especially when he wore his uniform, which he wasn't allowed to wear to our house, but I saw him on the street a couple of times. I had a terrible crush on him, and I used to play chess with him, and I would feed him, and I would be so happy. Because I knew when I got older, I'd be his girlfriend. Well, one day, Dad came home crying, and all he would say was that Manfred was dead. Well, how's that possible? He's only 14, how could he be dead? Well, he wouldn't tell me anything else. I was too young, I was just a little girl, I wouldn't understand. One of the things that I learned, I was probably the best eavesdropper you will ever have the unfortunate time to meet, because he wouldn't tell me anything. Wouldn't tell me what was going on, so every night after everybody went to sleep, I would go and sneak up to their bedroom door and listen to their conversations. And that's how I found out what happened to Manfred. Now remember, he was 14. He and his group of Hitler Youth went out one Saturday morning with a group of elderly Jewish gentlemen. And they were all carrying their weapons, whatever they were, and the Jewish gentlemen were all carrying a shovel. And they went to a deserted area out in the woods, and they made them, the Jewish gentlemen, dig a hole. And they told them exactly how long, how wide, and how deep. And when they were all done, they were told to stand at the end, and then the kids were told to shoot them, so they would fall into that hole. Well, these kids ranged from age of 12 to 15. And I guess Manfred's best friend said, I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna shoot this man. I don't even know this man. I'm not gonna shoot him. So the leader, who was an adult, pulled out his weapon, shot the young boy, and then shot the Jew. Well, needless to say, the rest of the boys did as they were told, and you might say, oh, I wouldn't do it, I wouldn't do it. Don't be so sure, because you couldn't save anybody. All you would do is get yourself killed, so I won't say I wouldn't do it, and you can think you might not, but I think most of us, under those circumstances, unfortunately, would probably do it. And I guess it bothered Manfred to the point where a couple of weeks later, he killed himself. That was a real heartbreak for everybody, my family and me. Sometimes the Nazis would come looking for me. Oh, by the way, the teacher that was my teacher when I got kicked out of school, he had forged my papers, and obviously the boys too. And that night, after I got kicked out of school, the Gestapo, which was the secret police for the Germans, for the Nazis, came and took him away, and he was never heard or seen from again. Obviously, he was killed, and there were some people that said it was my fault because it wasn't for me, that wouldn't have happened. But he was a man in his 50s, and he knew exactly what would happen to him if he got caught. So there was no way he didn't know what he was doing, and we don't know how many other kids he might have helped besides me. And every now and then, the family would find out that the Nazis were looking for me by name, and so they would take me to the nuns, the sisters. And I stayed there anywhere from one night to 6 weeks, depending on circumstances. And those sisters were wonderful. They would take care of us, and they would even do reading, writing, arithmetic with us, and they would pray with us. And there were only two things that were rules. One was never ever give anybody our last name or our address, and there was 5 of us kids as a rule. We were not allowed to give last names or addresses. That way, if one of us got caught, we couldn't turn the rest of them in. And the other thing was, do not let the priest see you, which is quite shocking to most people. In fact, it's really upset Father Rick over at St. Joseph the first time I told him about it. Because there were some priests and Lutheran ministers and Baptist ministers that would actually go along with the government and do what the Nazis told them to do and turn us over. So we didn't know which ones would and which one wouldn't, so the only safe thing was, don't let the priests see you. Which meant that we couldn't go into a shelter during air raids, which was really frightening. And one of the things that we were so scared of, you know how you might be scared when there's a tornado warning or something? Or somebody in the family is real sick and you get this scary feeling inside of you. Well, we had that feeling 24/7. And the worst part of it is, we didn't really know what we were scared of. We were all of us scared. 24/7 we were frightened. But what were we scared of? If the Nazis catch you, they'll take you away. What does that mean? What are they going to do to us? Where are they going to take us? We didn't know. People disappeared. Friends of ours, relatives, they disappeared. What happened to them? We didn't know. You can't let so-and-so see you. You gotta hide from so-and-so. Why? Because they'll tell the Nazis, and if they do, what does it mean? So it was a constant fear. Okay, if you're afraid of a tornado hitting your house, you know exactly what you're afraid of. We didn't know what we were scared of. We just knew we were all of us scared. So during the air raids, of course, when we were with the sisters, we were really scared because we didn't know whether anybody was alive afterwards, whether we could ever go back to where we were living and all that. So every time after an air raid the next morning, one of the sisters, and these were the sisters in the old-fashioned heavy, I guess you call it a habit, one of the sisters would go and check on our families, because of course they knew our last name and where we lived, and then they'd come back and tell us everything was fine. By the way, there was 5 of us kids, and I went back to see the sisters about a week after the war was over, and I don't know what happened to any of the rest of the, I don't know if any of the other 4 lived through it or not, since I didn't know who they were. I have no clue of whether they survived or not. One of the things that the Germans also did, they stripped all the Jewish people, even if they were born and raised in Germany. Some of them had fought in World War I for Germany. They stripped them of their citizenship. When I was ready to come to America, the judge offered to give me my German citizenship back, so I wouldn't be stateless when I came to America. And I won't tell you what I said, but it wasn't very polite when I told him what he could do with that citizenship. I'll leave it to your imagination. It wasn't nice, but I did. Yeah,
Same I guess.
I did. You know, every ruler has a motto. And when I say ruler, I should really say tyrant. And Hitler's was, terror is the most effective political tool or instrument. Anybody who can't bear the thought of someone nearby to suffer pain, they should join a sewing circle, not Hitler's party. Some of the things they did before they sent people to the concentration camp was unbelievable. Like they measured our hands in the size of our heads. That supposedly told them whether we were Jewish or not, which of course is ridiculous. They were thinking about measuring our noses, but then they realized that Italians and Greeks had bigger noses than Jews, so it really didn't work out. I don't know how many of you have heard of the gas chambers and the death camps. Okay, I'm going to tell you what a gas chamber is really like. It's a big room like a gym, no windows, and it's got shower heads all over the place. And they would tell these people, and the first couple of times it worked, they believed that after that, of course, they knew better, that they were gonna get a shower and be checked for lice. And then they would send them in there and seal the place up, and then they would turn on the showers. Except, of course, no water came out of the showers. The only thing that came out of the showers was gas. And they would die. And after a few hours, they would go back. I don't know how many hours it took for everybody to die. They'd go back and then have some of the other prisoners pull them out and bury them. Towards the end, they didn't bury them. I brought some pictures here that shows you that they didn't even get around to burying them. They also had ovens that they threw the bodies in. Now, I don't know, most of you probably live around Farmington, and I'm not sure how many people we have living in Farmington now. Doesn't matter. But in June of 1943, they built 4 new gas chambers and crematoriums in Auschwitz, and they had a daily capacity of killing 4,756 bodies in one day, every day. That's a lot. And the gas they used, in case anybody ever asked, or you have to put it down, it's Cyclone B, spelled with a Z-Y-C-L-O-N dash B. That's the gas they used. Oh yeah, we also had to wear yellow stars on our clothes. I had one, the Juden, which means Jew in German. That was one of the things we had to do. I never went outside with mine, but it was on my coat, so if they ever came to get me, I would have had to wear it. So. It was also another thing, the people that went to concentration camps and the ones that were registered, all the women had to add Sarah to their first name, and that's all the females, and all the males had to add Israel to their name. My little brother, his name was Peter, but he was registered as Israel. My mother's name was Ilse, she was registered as Sarah. And That was one of the things they were crazy about. And, oh, that night I told you about, the Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass. They burned down 101 synagogues, and in case somebody doesn't know what a synagogue is, it's a Jewish church, Jewish temple. They burned down 101 synagogues that night. They destroyed 7,500 businesses. They arrested 26,000 Jews that night and sent them to concentration camp, and they beat 91 Jews to death, all in that one night, November 9th, 1938. And World War II did not start till September 1939. So this was a whole year before the war started, and they were doing things like that. And people always ask me, how come nobody stopped the Nazis? How come America and the other countries didn't stop them? And I've always told them if they ever find out, I'd like to know myself, because nobody did. Of course, the Nazi Party was the only legal party in Germany. After, that was after July of 1933, 3 months after Hitler became Chancellor. They even killed some priests and nuns that were born Jewish and converted to being Catholics, became priests and nuns. They still sent them to concentration camps. They didn't think about it twice. They checked everybody's records. My family, their last name was Goldschmidt. You can't get much more Jewish than Goldschmidt, but they had no Jewish heritage. And every year, they would check their generation back, 6 generations back, check their papers, year after year, to find out if there wasn't, maybe someplace there was a little blot of Jew, but there wasn't. In fact, if Eisenhower had been over there, he would have been the first one they'd gone over, because that was a Jewish name. Roosevelt is a Jewish name, or was in those days, not nowadays. People wonder why the Nazis got away with that. Well, let me put it this way. Okay, you don't like her, so you want to get her in trouble. So you tell your dad that she said, or her dad said, such and such about Hitler, or one of the Nazis. And guess what? They'll come and arrest her, and she doesn't even have to go on trial or anything. They'll just come and get her on your word. Or maybe you're mad at your mother. And what teenage girl isn't? I mean, there's going to be a time where you're angry with your parents. You wouldn't want anything to happen to your parent, but it happened quite frequently over there, because all they had to do was turn them in. And once you turned them in, you couldn't do anything about it. It's not like on television where they went after to the concentration camp and got them back and all that. That's not the way it happened. Once they got them, that was it. And people turned each other in. But they weren't all like that. For instance, when they took the Jews to the camps, they took them in cattle cars. I assume all of you know what a cattle car is. And they would just put that many on a cattle car that they couldn't even sit down. So if somebody died on the way, which was quite frequent, they didn't even fall over because there was no place to fall. They were all upright. And that's how they took them to the concentration camps. And of course, it took days and days, which is one of the reasons why some of them didn't make it by the time they got there. But there were those Germans in their uniforms with the flags singing Nazi songs as the trains went by. And then there were the other kind. The little farm boy, the little old lady, the ditch digger. People, everyday people, that would take an apple or a piece of bread, and they would stand at the corner where the train slowed down enough so they could reach up, and they pushed something to eat through the slats. Those Germans existed too. Nobody ever talks about them, but they were there. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the German family, my great-great-uncle and his wife, and for the nuns, the teacher, and my neighbors. My neighbors all knew who I was. Oh, and when I got kicked out of school, I had a boyfriend. His name was Robert. And after I got kicked out, he still came by the house every day, tell me what went on in school and all that stuff. And then one day he came and he was all bruised up. He'd obviously been in a fight. And when I asked him who he fought, he said it was none of my darn business. Well, Dad didn't think it was that easy to get away with, so he took him in the other room. And next thing I knew, I was told never to speak to him again, never to go near him again. If I saw him, to ignore it. That the two of us never met and never could see each other again or talk to each other again. Didn't make any sense, but what turned out to be, Robert's father was a Nazi. And he had told Robert that if he ever caught him hanging around with any of those dirty little Jews, especially that dirty little Jew girl down the street, meaning me, he'd get what he had coming. And he found out that he was still coming to see me, so his dad beat him half to death. Needless to say, I never spoke to him or saw him again. He was 10 or 11 at the time. And his father beat him for being friends with me because I was a dirty little Jew. The man didn't know me, didn't know anything about me or my family. Now, one thing I have to tell you, I'm talking about the Jews. 6 million Jews got killed in concentration camps. Very few people know 6 million non-Jews also got killed the same way. There were those that didn't like Hitler and his policies. There were Jehovah's Witnesses. There were gypsies. There were homosexuals. There were petty criminals. There were communists. You name it. Anything he didn't like got killed. Now, he also went, right from the beginning, he went after what he considered the useless ones, which were mentally and physically challenged people. As far as he was concerned, they were useless. I mean, who needs them? But he didn't want to spend the money on transportation and all these other things for them. There must be an easier way to get rid of them. So what they did was, a lot of them, they would get these big utility vehicles, and they put them in there. They drive them to a deserted area, and then they would take a hose and put it on the exhaust, and put the exhaust inside where the people were, and keep the engine running, and then walk away and come back later and bury them. That was a cheap way and an easy way to get rid of physically and mentally challenged people. Now, I'm telling you all this because everybody, and I mean everybody, is liable to, at one time or another, have some kind of prejudice, whether it's a different race, different religion, different ethnic background. Everybody has that feeling once in a while. This is where it starts. Somebody makes a funny joke about another person's nationality. Ha 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 ha, isn't that funny? It's not. That's when it first starts for you to say, that's not funny. Forget it. You don't like somebody because you're Catholic and they're Jewish, or vice versa. Doesn't matter. It shouldn't make any difference. You have a different skin color. Shouldn't make any difference. Okay, people my age can't do anything to change the world today. Your teachers are still fairly young, so they still got a chance, some of them anyway, to change the world. People my age don't. But the real change has to come from you. It's got to come from you, the young ones. You're the ones that have to remember that you can't judge a person by the way they look, the way they talk, or anything like that. This is where it started in Germany. Everybody had to be in the Hitler Youth, where they were brainwashed from day one. I know people have made comments, and I'm not Catholic, but part of my family is, made comments about the Pope, saying, well, he was in the Hitler Youth. Yes, he was. He didn't have a choice. His parents didn't have a choice. That didn't make people a Nazi. They had no choice. Hitler Youth was mandatory, except for people like me who weren't allowed in. So you can't judge people, and Hitler Youth was not like Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. You could go in if you wanted to, but you didn't have to. You had no choice. You had to. You gotta remember that no matter what, you have got to treat everybody with respect. And if you remember that, it can't happen again. Because like I said, it's up to the young people your age, even younger, and of course older, to make sure it doesn't happen again. This is the greatest country in the world, and we want to keep it that way. When the concentration camps finally were opened, then General, later President, but General Eisenhower, General Montgomery, who was also World War II general, and General Omar Bradley was an American general, and General Montgomery was from England. The three of them went to a concentration camp, and I have pictures up here showing it. And they found hundreds of thousands of bodies that had never been buried. So they rounded up the people in the area, and oh, heaven forbid, those people had never heard, seen, or smelled anything, didn't know anything about it, which of course is ridiculous. So they, the GIs and the Russian soldiers and whoever, they rounded them up, they made them come to the camp, they made them see it, and then they made them bury all these people. Now I have pictures up here about them. They're not very pretty. And I also always carry this picture. That's my mother. She died in Auschwitz in a gas chamber. So did my little 5-year-old brother. But there were the others. Oh, that reminds me. How many of you have seen monster movies? What's a monster look like? Give me an idea. You, give me an idea. What's it look like? A hairy beast? Well, you're dead wrong. Dead wrong. They're not green. They're not hairy beasts. This is what a monster looks like.
Scary looking.
That is Adolf Hitler. That is what a monster really looks like. Okay? Keep that in mind. You can't, again, you can't judge a person by the way they look. When soldiers from all the Allies opened the camps, they found horrible scenes there. I'm going to show you a picture of a little baby that was alive when they found this baby. I don't know if the baby survived or not, but this is what the baby looked like in the concentration camp when they opened it. This child was alive when they found it. That's how they looked. A lot of them. When the Americans and French and all the Allies came there, they found all these dead people. Here is a sign that's in front of one of the camps. It says, this is the site of the infamous Belsen concentration camp, liberated by the British on April 15th, 1945. 10,000 unburied dead were found here. Another 13,000 have since died. All of them victims of the German New Order in Europe and an example of Nazi culture. This happened quite frequently, that after they opened the camps, that a lot of people died afterwards. Some of them would have never survived anyway. And some of them took the soldiers a little while to figure it out. Actually died from food. They had not had decent food in many, many years. And when the soldiers came in, they started feeding them regular food, and it actually killed some of them. That's how bad these people were. It's unbelievable. It's impossible for us to understand what happened and how it happened. I don't know where else it happens. I guess it still happens in other countries where these things go on. But Germany was supposed to be a cultured country. It wasn't a third world country where they didn't know or couldn't read and couldn't write and lived like cavemen. Germany was one of the most cultured countries in the world at that time. And yet it happened there. How do we keep it from happening again? Only by treating each other correctly and with dignity. Okay, so we don't agree on everything. Good heavens, I'd like to see anybody that agrees with everybody else. It would be kind of dull anyway, wouldn't it? I mean, if we never had an argument, that would really be dull. But this is the important part. These people died. Now, like my mother, she called my foster dad, and I didn't find that out until long after the war. She called him one night before they locked her up, and I guess Peter was about 2 at the time, and she told my foster dad, take care of me, and she said my other brother was in South America, which incidentally wasn't the case. They had caught him, and he was in France in a camp at that time, but we didn't know that. That she was gonna turn on the gas, but not light it, and her and Peter were gonna go to sleep that way. And my foster dad spent the whole night, hour after hour, talking her out of it. Until the day he died, it bothered him because eventually she most likely was killed by gas anyway. We never did get a death certificate. We don't know what day my mom and Peter died. We don't know. But we know they're dead, but, well, at least we know she is. Peter was only 5 and he wouldn't know his name or anything. And for about 5 years after the war, we kept trying to find him and it never happened. But a lot of people did commit suicide. They were considered the lucky ones. I went to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. And if you ever get a chance, you're in for some horrible experience. I tell you, it's not an easy place to go to. I was doing fine, and my friend asked me, she said, do you want me to hang around with you? And I said, nah, I haven't seen it all, heard it all, I've been there, so it doesn't matter. Well, it just so happens that I went up on the 3rd floor, and there was a cattle car sitting there, a real one. And if I just looked at it, it would be fine, but dummy me, I got on it. I went in the cattle car, and of course, once I got on it, I freaked. Took 2 people to get me out of there and calm me down, and I almost passed out. I freaked out, okay? But you go to that place, and they have things laid out from the day the Nazis started till the day General Eisenhower refused to salute whoever it was that turned over the country in Germany. He said that wasn't a war, it was slaughter, and it was. Like I said, I brought a bunch of pictures. They're not pretty, so if you don't want to look at them, I won't blame you, because they're not nice. They're mostly pictures of dead bodies, bones, what have you. And this one is an oven where they put the bodies in later, after they were dead. At least we hoped they were all dead before they threw them in there. But with these people, you never know.
Could you wrap up by kind of saying, when did you come to America?
Okay.
And how did you wind up in Farmington? And
I came to America in 1952. I had married an American soldier. And, like I said, well, I didn't have a legal guardian, so I had to get permission to get married from the judge, and I had to get permission to get a visa from the judge, and that's when the judge offered to reinstate my term of citizenship, and I told him what he could do. And I came to America. I have 4 children, and I have 10 grandchildren and 5 great-grandchildren. I lived around Chicago most of the time, but about 7 years ago, one of my daughter-in-laws got a job offer in Farmington to run the lab at Parkland Hospital. And I've been taking care of her son, one of my grandchildren, practically from the day he was born when she was at work and my son were at work. And some of you know him. This is Miss Wadler's room. He's the boy with the long hair. Steve, I think some of you have known him since 2nd grade, haven't you? Yeah, okay. And so when they moved down here, I decided to come with them because I was very close to them and very close to Steve. Steve wasn't gonna move without me, so.
How many
That's why I came
languages
down
do you
here.
speak? How many languages do you speak?
2.
2?
Yeah. But I try not to speak German really. And I've never gone back. People say, have you ever gone back? I haven't. I would have liked to go to Israel for a visit, but of course now I wouldn't even if they paid me. Too dangerous. And like I said, there were Germans that were not Nazis. Of course, the day after World War II stopped, you couldn't find any Nazis in Germany. Not a single one. But if you have any questions, now's the time to ask. We've still got a couple of minutes, I guess. Or any comments, anything. Well, you were very attentive, I have to say. Yes?
Do you know anybody else in Farmington that had to go through the Holocaust?
No, I haven't met anybody. They said there was a lady that used to live here, but I guess she passed away.
There's a gentleman at St. Paul, Hal Baus.
I don't know him. I know I met a couple of soldiers. In fact, I was lucky enough to be asked to speak to some World War II veterans a year ago on Veterans Day, and oh man, that was the biggest thrill of my life because those guys are my heroes, you know. Right.
Did you ever actually see Hitler?
I don't think so. He had so many doubles, you know. I don't think I ever did. And we didn't have television in those years. So if I did see him in a movie, I don't know.
Well, we thank you so much for coming. We want to give you a round of applause.